Okay, so today we're going to be looking at the grease the groove method. It was invented by this guy called Pavel Tsatsouline. So he's a pretty famous strength coach. He trained like the US Marines, the US Navy. He also pretty much introduced the kettlebell, the use of the kettlebell in the West. So he has pretty big credentials. This is a summary of what the method is. It's also inspired by the recent podcast he did with Andrew Huberman. So let's go. So first of all, why does this matter? Why does this method matter? So we know that traditional strength training focuses a lot on muscle fatigue and recovery. You might have heard of the 2-set method, which requires you to basically go to failure in the hopes of building strength. However, with the grease the groove method, we are shifting the focus to neural drive. So we're focusing on training the nervous system to perform movements efficiently. So we're doing pull-ups, we're doing dips as often as possible without fatiguing in order to be able to execute them more efficiently. And according to Pavel, strength is a skill and it's not just about muscle adaptations. So what do we mean by neural drive? Because I'm not a scientist, you're probably not a scientist. So basically, neural drive is the brain's ability to recruit motor units effectively. So when we lift weight, particularly heavy weight, our brain has to send a signal in order to use these motor units to be able to lift that weight. So the more practice we get at lifting a heavy weight, we are basically creating grooves. So these are the neural pathways that get created. And so the more often you perform the movement, the more efficient and automatic it becomes. So this is the grease part, where you're doing it more and more. You're practicing over and over again in order to reinforce the efficiency of that movement. So this guy, Pavel, he believes that strength is a skill, and frequent low fatigue practice improves performance. And with each repetition, the neural pathways essentially get greased. So we get better and more efficient at performing the movement. And so over time, the nervous system requires less effort for the same output, which just basically means over time of you performing grease the groove on a certain exercise, you will get quicker at doing it, but also you'll be able to do it with much more ease. And basically the traditional training model focuses on the cramming. So you're trying to get as many exercises done within an hour as possible, whereas grease the groove is very much focused on spacing out your training. So here we have a table which is basically comparing the sets, the recovery, and the adaptations. So yeah, in the traditional workout / strength training model, there's a heavy emphasis on, doing as many sets and tool failure as possible. Whereas with grease the groove, you're doing the sets frequently, but not tool fatigue. And in terms of recovery, the traditional cramming model requires a lot of recovery afterwards, whereas grease the groove is essentially trying to minimize that fatigue. And so in the traditional cramming model, we are basically relying on the adaptations to occur after doing like a long bout of effort, whereas the grease the groove is essentially we're just focusing on reinforcing the skill daily, and we're not really caring about how fatigued we get. We're not looking to fatigue as a sign of progress. So a lot of people, they feel good after doing a workout that felt very tiring and fatiguing, but we know that this has a lot of drawbacks when it comes to recovery. So you need to take a lot of time off after doing a workout like that. So some of the scientific foundations for Grease the Groove came from studies done in the 1950s by some Soviet guys. So they basically found no link between strength and muscle size. So they had a bunch of athletes who were very bulky and muscular, and then they also had athletes of less muscle mass, and they've basically found that it does not matter how big your muscle is, it does not necessarily mean that you are insanely strong. So they found that strength improvements came from neural efficiency. So essentially they analyzed the EMG activity of these athletes. So we're not going to go too deep into that, but basically they found that more advanced athletes actually could lift a ton of weight without putting in too much effort. And so what this meant was that they were able to lift even more weight if they tried really hard, compared to less advanced athletes who had to put in a lot of effort to lift a heavy weight. And this Hebbian principle, which again is based in science, states that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you're an advanced athlete and you're lifting a heavy weight, essentially your motor units are more synchronized, and so this synchronization just leads to less effort in lifting a heavy weight. Okay, so the Grease the Groove protocol. These are the points to remember when following this Grease the Groove method. So you need to use a moderate heavy weight if you are doing non-body weight. So about 75 to 85% of your 1 rep max. Then you're performing half of your max reps per set and resting at least 10 minutes between sets. So for example, you can do 3 reps every 10 minutes for an hour. Now, it doesn't matter if you're doing this at home, for example, you can rest up to 1 hour in between sets. It doesn't matter as long as you get that 10 minutes of rest at least. So the benefits of this technique is obviously that it builds strength without burnout. It also encourages proper technique because you're not exhausting yourself, you're not going to failure, so there is less pressure for you to perform. And also lower injury risk, as well as increasing muscle volume. Can increase muscle volume? That's wrong. It should say can increase muscle size. So they actually found that Grease the Groove method actually grows muscle, and they don't actually know the scientific reason for this, but yeah, Grease the Groove, it builds muscle even though you're training for strength, which is pretty crazy. And of course, it integrates easily into your day. Now that is specific to everyone's routines and lives, but as you can imagine, for someone that works from home, this method of training would be perfect if you are trying to increase something like pull-ups. Okay, there's also a bonus effect. It is the strength after effect. So doing short strength bouts actually increases your alertness and performance. So similar to how light exercise boosts focus, it's like a neural warm-up. So I don't know about you, but I found myself sometimes before having to do a presentation, I do like a few push-ups on the ground, and it just kind of like boosts your focus, you know. It helps with cognitive work as well. Okay, so the key takeaways of the Grease the Groove method is that we're focusing on training the nervous system as opposed to the muscles, although of course the muscles are involved. And this essentially allows us to stay fresh and do the exercises as frequently, as precisely as possible. So heavy enough to respect, light enough not to fear. Basically, this is talking about the weight that you should choose when doing Grease the Groove. So you might want to do Grease the Groove with a certain weight, and essentially you don't want to pick a weight that's too heavy or too light, so something that feels challenging. Yeah, consistency is better than overexerting yourself. And to finish up, we have a quote by Pavel. So he says, Grease the Groove isn't about working harder, it's about practicing smarter. And it really is, because With Grease the Groove, again, you're not trying to break a sweat, you're not trying to go to failure, get a good pump. You're just focusing more on the movement itself and getting used to doing it so that you will eventually become stronger and better at it.